You know, last year, the very first weekend of the year had a horror film that was actually really good. And you know, it just didn't feel right. Like, the first week of January is reserved for bad horror films. What is this quality filmmaking? Get that out of here. But okay, what does Blumhouse have in store for us for this first weekend of January? Oh yeah, that hit the spot. This is exactly the crapola I expect out of January horror. Alright, before we get started, as always, a quick thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. If you enjoy the content I make and would like to offer your support, then for as little as $1 a month, you can get your name listed right here at the start of every video. A link to that is in the description below. And now, let's get into the actual review.
Marco.
Night Swim, based on the horror short of the same name, tells the story of the Waller family, who move into a new house and discover that there may be something ominous about their new swimming pool. Going into this, I was kinda curious about how this was going to work as a feature film. The idea of some kind of dark entity living in your swimming pool, I could see that working as a short, but can you really stretch this idea to feature-length runtime? Because I mean, come on, once you know there's something in the water, it seems like there's a really easy solution. Just stay out of the pool. But I'll admit, for the first hour or so, I was actually almost kind of on board with what they were trying to do. They were kind of trying to do this Jack Torrance character arc with the dad and how it ties in the pool, and it seems to be making him in some ways stronger and yet weaker simultaneously. And yeah, there is kind of this mystery there of what exactly the pool creature wants. And even though I wasn't finding anything that scary, I was a little bit intrigued. I was wondering, at least tangentially, where's this going? What exactly is the payoff going to be? It did feel kinda Stephen King-esque in that way. Well, after all that build-up, we get to that payoff in the last half hour of the movie, and it's pretty bad. But okay, before I dive into how it doesn't work, I do want to give this movie credit where I can before I rip it apart. First of all, you don't get the feeling that the director is sleepwalking his way through it. Believe me, I have seen plenty of bad horror films where you can tell the director was like, okay, let's just get this scene over with. And this is not one of them. Which makes sense, because this is director Bryce McGuire's feature film debut, and it's based on his own short film. So he probably did feel like he had a lot to prove here. And to his credit, it does feel like he knows what should go into a horror film. It's paced pretty well, the set pieces are spread out, but not so much so that it feels like there's dead spots. And he also does seem to understand about mounting terror, slowly working your way up to the big scares instead of starting off too big too early. And for the most part, the directing is competent. And every once in a while, there'd be an inspired shot or two that made me go, I can tell he's trying. And out of all the actors, the one that I'd say walks away without a scratch on her is Carrie Condon. Which shouldn't be a surprise. It's Carrie Condon. She's just a naturally gifted actress. She is giving it her all in this performance. Even when the plot goes off the deep end, she is still committing hard to this performance. This performance is in fact too good for this movie. So, yeah, that's most of the positives. So, okay, what's the problem with this movie? Why doesn't it ultimately work? For the most part, everything about it just screams generic. The characters are pretty generic, the story is pretty generic, and the jump scares are generic. This just feels like your typical PG-13 jump scare fest, complete with all the cliches. You got characters making actions so dumb that they cease being believable. You got plot developments that are clearly being set up for later, but are largely forgotten about by the characters until it's time for it to come back. And the horror set pieces are solid ideas, but at the same time, I also can't help but think, there's really only so much you can do with a scary pool. And I couldn't help but feel like these would work better as set pieces in separate horror films, rather than having them all together in the same film. And there are just weird things kind of sprinkled throughout the film that do seem kind of odd. Like, at one point, the young boy tries to use a camcorder to record something supernatural, instead of trying to use his cell phone, which, I don't know, that felt a little anachronistic. And the dialogue is pretty bad in spots, or a line read would be a little off, including one near the end that was so bad I nearly burst out laughing right there in the theater. And like a lot of supernatural creatures, we never really get a feel of this creature. We never really find out exactly what he wants. Okay, let me repeat that. We do find out what he wants, but we never really find out the why. Why exactly is he doing all this? And you just don't feel the ancientness of this creature. You can tell they want you to feel like he's been around for so long, terrorizing families for just decades and decades and decades, and man, you just don't feel it. And the way his supernatural abilities work don't really feel that well defined, or he'll do something that seems really counterintuitive to what his ultimate plan is. But, okay, for the most part, that's mostly still passable enough. Like, sure, generic isn't good, but generic is still at the very least watchable, right? Well, okay. Now let's get into what really sucks about this film. The climax is awful. It is a baffling mixture of laughably bad performances, really stupid illogical character decisions, and lame walking down the hallway and who's hiding behind the corner jump scares. Any credit I was willing to give this film was defenestrated in the last 20 minutes. Far from being scary, the imagery that we are exposed to is so laughably ridiculous that you're just wondering how anybody, whether it be the director, the editor, and literally everybody else who had to give it the final approval, didn't look at this and say, hey, maybe this isn't even remotely frightening and might accidentally make an entire audience burst out laughing at how bad it looks. Like, maybe on paper these seemed like good scary ideas, but in execution they did not stick the landing. I'm not sure if it's a performance thing, a directing thing, or an effects thing, or some combination of the three, but whatever it was, it just didn't work. And yeah, when you're building up something in the first hour and then you completely botch the ending, the audience is going to remember the botched ending way more than the build-up. Now, is Night Swim absolutely horrible? I guess not. I mean, there are signs of competence to be found here, particularly in its first hour, and there are good ideas for horror set pieces in here. But make no mistake, there are awful things in it, especially its ending. This is a case where I almost kinda want to recommend it, like if it's on streaming for free, just because the ending does need to be seen in order to be believed. But even then, that's a big almost. But as to the question of whether or not this is a genuinely good film with effective scares, this thing sinks like a rock. Night Swim gets an empty shot. I just really hope this director goes on to do bigger and better things, hopefully with a better script. And I guess that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching. As always, if you want to see my early thoughts of any film I watch or to read more of my reviews, make sure to check out my Letterboxd account. The link to that is in the description below. And make sure that you're subscribed so that you don't miss any upcoming reviews. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time.